They say family is everything, but all I remember from last night is the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like a brick. My own son marched into my modest New York apartment with 30 strangers in tow, turning my carefully prepared dinner into a chaotic free-for-all that left me utterly invisible. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake up at 5:30 in my small Bronx apartment on the third floor of a pre-war building, the kind with thin walls and radiators that clank like ghosts from another era. The cold November wind rattles the window panes, and the hum of early traffic on the Grand Concourse seeps through every crack in these old walls. I limp to my tiny kitchen, my arthritis reminding me of every hard year I've lived, and I smell the faint aroma of coffee grounds left from the day before. The linoleum floor creaks under my bare feet, and I steel myself for another long day filled with calls to my son Michael, calls he rarely returns. The walls of my living room are decorated with faded pictures of better days. There's Michael at his high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with hope. There's Sarah, my daughter, holding her first baby. My granddaughter Emma, now 15 and too busy with her phone to visit Grandma. And there's Robert, my husband of 37 years, back when his smile wasn't strained with worry about bills, and his hair wasn't gray with the weight of disappointment. These photographs hold memories of my sacrifices, each frame a testament to the love I poured out like water from a broken pitcher. That night, the night that changed everything, I had set the table with such hope. I spread my grandmother's white tablecloth, the one with tiny roses embroidered along the edges. Crisp with starch, I had applied with trembling hands. My best china, the set I got for my wedding, sat perfectly arranged with cloth napkins folded like little flowers. The apartment smelled of homemade chicken stew simmering on the stove, the recipe my mother taught me 50 years ago. I had dreams that night, dreams of reconnection, of laughter filling this tiny space again, of Michael finally seeing me as more than just a resource to be tapped. Instead, at 7:15 sharp, my son burst through the door I had unlocked for him, and behind him came a flood of strangers. 30 people I had never seen before in my life, talking loud, laughing louder, tracking mud across my clean floors. "Surprise, Ma!" Michael called out, his arms spread wide like he was announcing a circus. I brought some friends for dinner. I stood there in my kitchen doorway, wearing my best dress, the navy blue one with small white flowers that I had saved for special occasions, and watched my carefully planned evening dissolve into chaos. Young men and women poured into my living room, teenagers with backpacks and college students with attitudes, all talking at once about how great it was that Mike's mom was throwing a party. "But Michael," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise. "I only made enough food for 4 people. He shrugged, already headed to my refrigerator like he owned it. "Don't worry about it, Ma. Everyone's bringing something to share." But no one had brought anything, not a single bag of chips, not a bottle of soda, nothing. They had come for the free meal, and my son had served me up like the main course without asking, without warning, without caring how I felt about any of it. I want you to understand something. This wasn't the first time Michael had taken advantage of my kindness, but it was the first time he had done it so publicly, so brazenly, with such complete disregard for my feelings. As I watched strangers sit on my couch, put their feet up on my coffee table, and raid my kitchen cabinets looking for snacks, something inside me began to crack like ice under pressure. My mind drifted back to where this all began, about 18 months ago, when Michael first started what I now recognize was a systematic campaign to drain me dry. He had called me on a Tuesday morning in March, his voice tight with that familiar mix of desperation and entitlement that had become his signature sound. "Ma, I need help," he had said, and my heart immediately clenched because I knew what was coming. "I'm behind on rent again. Jennifer and I had some unexpected expenses, and if I don't come up with $2,000 by Friday, we're going to get evicted." $2,000. I remember staring at my bank statement that morning, seeing the modest savings I had scraped together from my part-time job at the local grocery store. Money I had been setting aside for a new winter coat because mine had holes in the pockets. But Michael needed help, and what kind of mother would I be if I let my son become homeless? "Of course, sweetheart," I had said, already mentally calculating how I could make the transfer. "I'll take care of it today." "Thanks, Ma," he had replied, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "You don't have to worry about me paying you back right away, but I promise I will. Jennifer's got this new job opportunity, and once that comes through, we'll be in a much better position financially." But Jennifer's job opportunity never materialized. Or maybe it did, and the money just went elsewhere. Because 2 months later, Michael called again. This time it was car repairs. $1,500 for a transmission that had supposedly given out without warning. Then it was emergency dental work. Then it was help with groceries because they were temporarily struggling. Each request came with the same promises, the same assurances that this would be the last time, the same casual mention of paying me back when things got better. I nursed my aging knees through double shifts at the grocery store, scanning barcodes and bagging produce while my feet screamed in my worn-out shoes, sending him money while begging silently for him to respect himself, to stand on his own feet like the proud young man I had raised him to be. But pride seemed to have leaked out of Michael somewhere along the way, replaced by an expectation that Mom would always be there to solve his problems with her checkbook. "I'm just borrowing," he said during one of our late-night phone conversations, his voice carrying that edge it got when he thought I might be getting tired of his requests. "I'll pay you back, Ma. You know I'm good for it." I remember the cold silence that followed, the way his eyes darted away from mine when he visited the apartment the next day to pick up another check. I had forgiven so much by then, missed birthdays where he forgot to call, broken promises to spend holidays together. That time he borrowed my car and returned it with an empty gas tank and a dent in the rear bumper he never explained. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't listening, I caught him whispering to friends about Ma's endless support, and the casual way he said it made my stomach turn. Like I was some kind of automatic teller machine that dispensed cash on demand, not a person with feelings and needs of my own. Was I just a bank to him? A servant wearing the mask of a mother? The line between love and being used had blurred so painfully that I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Every time I looked at my dwindling savings account, every time I chose generic brands at the grocery store to stretch my own budget, every time I postponed replacing my broken reading glasses because I had just sent Michael another payment, I asked myself the same question. When did caring for my child become this? 3 months before the dinner disaster, my world got smaller and lonelier in ways I hadn't expected. My 71st birthday came and went with barely a whisper of acknowledgement. I had spent the morning cleaning my apartment, hoping maybe Michael would surprise me with a visit, or that Sarah might call with plans to take me out for lunch. Instead, I got a text message at 11:58 p.m. from Michael that simply read, "Happy your day, Ma. Sorry I was busy. Rain check on celebrating?" That rain check never came, just like so many other promises he had made over the years. He never asked about my arthritis flare-ups that kept me awake at night, rubbing my swollen knuckles with the cheap pain relief cream I bought at the dollar store because the prescription stuff was too expensive. He never noticed when I started using a cane to get around. Never commented on the way I had to hold on to railings when I climbed the stairs to my apartment. 2 weeks after my forgotten birthday, I had what my doctor called a cardiac episode. Not quite a heart attack, but close enough to land me in the emergency room at Bronx Lebanon Hospital at 3 in the morning. I spent 6 hours sitting on a gurney in a hallway, wearing a hospital gown that didn't close properly in the back, waiting for test results and trying not to panic about what this might mean for my future. I called Michael from the hospital. It went straight to voicemail. I called Sarah. Same thing. Finally, around noon, Sarah called me back, but only to tell me she was stuck at work and couldn't get away. Michael never called at all. I rode the bus home alone that afternoon, clutching discharge papers that warned me about stress and overexertion, feeling more invisible than I had ever felt in my life. But the discovery that truly shattered my heart happened completely by accident. Michael had left his phone on my kitchen counter during one of his visits, and when it buzzed with a text message, I glanced at it automatically. The message was from someone named Jake, and the preview showed just enough to make my blood run cold. "Dude, your mom's place is perfect for the next party. She actually cooks real food, not just pizza." I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something compelled me to pick up that phone and scroll through the conversation, and what I found there made me feel like the floor was disappearing beneath my feet. Messages going back months. My son strategizing with his friends about the mom's free buffet idea, laughing about how easy it was to get me to cook for large groups if he just framed it as family bonding time. "She never says no," Michael had written to Jake just 2 weeks earlier, "and she makes enough food to feed an army. Plus, her place is bigger than most of our apartments, and she's always happy to have company. It's perfect." Jake had replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "Your mom sounds like a saint," or a sucker. Either way, count me in for Thursday. I felt like my soul split in two as I read those words. The phone trembled in my hands as I scrolled through more messages, each one revealing another layer of calculation behind my son's recent visits. The dinner invitations that I had treasured as signs that he wanted to spend time with me were just opportunities for him to bring more and more friends to eat my food and enjoy my hospitality without giving anything back. That night, I sat in my claw-footed bathtub, the one luxury in my modest apartment, letting the hot water soothe my aching joints while tears streamed down my cheeks. I squeezed my favorite teacup, a delicate piece with painted violets that had been my mother's, until hairline cracks appeared in the porcelain. The sound it made when it finally broke was so small, so quiet, just like the sound of my own heart breaking over and over again. For the first time in my life as a mother, I thought, no more. But even as that thought formed in my mind, fear clawed at me with sharp fingers. Loneliness was already such a bitter companion, sitting with me through long evenings when the only voices I heard came from my old television set. What would I become without Michael and Sarah and the grandchildren? What was a mother without children who needed her? I packed away the old photos that night, the ones that showed us as a happy family at Disney World, at Christmas morning celebrations, at birthday parties where everyone was smiling. I put them in boxes and shoved those boxes into my bedroom closet where I wouldn't have to see them every day. Then I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the weary woman with hollow eyes who looked back at me, and I barely recognized her. Was it love that kept me chained to this cycle of giving and taking? Or was it pain disguised as love, the kind of toxic attachment that destroys the giver while enabling the taker? I didn't have answers that night, but I had questions. And sometimes questions are the first step toward finding the strength to change. The morning after I discovered those text messages, I did something I had never done before in my 30-year relationship with my adult son. I confronted him directly. Michael came by around 10 a.m., ostensibly to check on me, but really to pick up a check I had promised him for his utilities bill. Instead of heading straight for my checkbook like I usually did, I sat him down at my kitchen table and placed his phone between us. "We need to talk," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, steadier than I felt inside. "Sure, Ma, but can we make it quick? I'm supposed to meet Jennifer for lunch, and you know how she gets when I'm late." "You can't just bring strangers into my home without asking," I said, the words rushing out before I could lose my nerve. "And you can't talk about me like I'm some kind of resource to be used." His face changed then, the casual mask slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "What are you talking about?" I showed him the phone, the messages still open on the screen. His eyes flicked over them quickly, and I watched him calculate his response, trying to figure out how much he could get away with denying. "They're family too, Ma," he said finally, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Friends are the family you choose, right? I thought you liked having people over. You're always saying how quiet it gets here." "I like having people over when I'm prepared for it," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I was screaming. "I like having people over when they're invited, not when they're described as freeloaders taking advantage of Mom's free buffet." Michael's face flushed red, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down. "Look, I'm sorry you saw that, but you're blowing this way out of proportion. It's not like I charged them admission or anything. We're just friends hanging out, and sometimes friends share meals. That's normal." "What's not normal," I said, standing up slowly because my knees needed time to cooperate, "is planning parties at someone else's house without asking. What's not normal is treating your mother like a catering service." That's when Sarah showed up, letting herself in with the key I had given her years ago for emergencies. She must have sensed the tension immediately, because she looked back and forth between Michael and me with the expression she had worn as a child when she knew she was walking into trouble. "What's going on?" she asked, setting her purse down carefully like she was defusing a bomb. "Mom's being dramatic about the dinner party thing," Michael said, his voice taking on that whining quality that had annoyed me since he was 16. "She's acting like I committed some kind of crime by bringing friends over." Sarah looked at me with tired eyes that reminded me too much of my own reflection. "Maybe Mom's just old-fashioned about these things, Michael. You know how her generation is about propriety and manners." Her generation. Like I was some relic from ancient times instead of a woman who had lived through the civil rights movement, the moon landing, and the birth of the internet. Like my desire to be treated with basic respect was some quaint, outdated notion, instead of a fundamental human need. "I'm not being old-fashioned," I said, and I could hear the edge creeping into my voice. "I'm being reasonable. If someone wants to host a party, they should host it at their own place, with their own food, using their own resources. They shouldn't trick their elderly mother into catering it for free." "Elderly?" Michael laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Ma, you're 71, not 91, and nobody tricked you. You love cooking, you love having a full house. I was doing you a favor." A favor. He was doing me a favor by exploiting my hospitality and talking about me like a sucker with his friends. The audacity of it took my breath away, but before I could respond, Robert walked in from the bedroom where he had been watching television and pretending not to hear our raised voices. "What's all the shouting about?" he asked, but his tone suggested he didn't really want to know. "Mom's upset about the dinner party," Sarah explained, using the same tone she might use to describe a child's tantrum. "She thinks Michael should have asked before bringing his friends over." Robert sighed. The long-suffering sigh of a man who had been married to me for 37 years and had heard me complain about our children more times than he cared to count. Sarah's probably right, honey. Maybe you should be grateful that he wants to include you in his social life. Most sons Michael's age don't spend any time with their mothers at all. Grateful. I should be grateful that my son was using me. I should be grateful that my home had been turned into a free restaurant without my consent. I should be grateful that my feelings and my financial limitations meant nothing to the people I had sacrificed everything for. That's when Mrs. Ortiz knocked on my door. Elena Ortiz, my next-door neighbor, a small woman in her 70s with silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun and hands that smelled like the roses she grew in coffee cans on her fire escape. She had probably heard the arguing through our thin walls and had come to check on me, the way good neighbors do in old buildings where privacy is a luxury nobody can afford. "Excuse me," she said politely when Michael opened the door, "but I was wondering if I could borrow some sugar from Maria." It was a transparent excuse. Elena always had sugar, just like she always had coffee and bread and anything else a person might need. But it was also a lifeline. She stepped into my apartment with the confidence of someone who belonged there, surveyed the tense faces of my family members, and offered me something I hadn't felt in months, an ally. "Actually," Elena said, turning to me with gentle eyes that seemed to see everything, "I was thinking of making some tea. Maria, would you like to join me on my fire escape? The sunset should be beautiful from there tonight." It wasn't really a question. It was an invitation to escape, to breathe, to remember that there were people in this world who saw me as more than a resource to be exploited. I accepted gratefully, leaving my family to stew in their own justifications while I followed Elena next door to her apartment that smelled like cinnamon and old books. We sat on her fire escape that evening, watching the sun paint the Bronx sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Elena didn't need to know all the details of what had happened. Neighbors in buildings like ours develop a sixth sense about family drama, but she listened anyway as I poured out my frustration and hurt. "You know," she said eventually, her voice soft but clear, "my Roberto used to tell me that the hardest part about being a parent is learning when to stop." Stop what? Stop giving. Stop fixing. Stop being available for every crisis and every request. She sipped her tea, real tea, in a real cup, not the cheap coffee I usually settled for, and gazed out over the city lights beginning to twinkle below us. "He said that children don't become adults until their parents stop treating them like children, and sometimes that means letting them fall." Elena's words settled into my heart like seeds in fertile soil. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flicker of something I had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. Her gentle warmth was a balm on my fractured spirit, the first glimpse of light in what had felt like an endless tunnel of disappointment and exploitation. "But what if they don't learn?" I asked her. "What if they just fall apart without me?" "Then they fall," she said simply. "And then they get back up because that's what people do when they don't have someone else to catch them every time." That night, after I returned to my own apartment where the argument had apparently resolved itself into an uneasy truce, I lay in bed thinking about Elena's words. Through the thin walls, I could hear her moving around her kitchen, probably cleaning up our teacups and watering her plants like she did every evening. The sound was comforting, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world, that not all relationships were built on exploitation and manipulation. I had spent so many years being afraid of loneliness that I had forgotten there was a difference between being alone and being lonely. Elena lived alone, but she wasn't lonely. She had created a life filled with small pleasures and genuine connections, with neighbors who cared about her and hobbies that brought her joy. She had boundaries, something I had apparently forgotten how to maintain. 2 days later, I was ready to take my first real step toward reclaiming my life. When Michael called around lunchtime, using that familiar tone that meant he was about to ask for something, I surprised both of us by saying no before he could even finish his request. "Ma, I hate to do this again, but Jennifer and I are in a bit of a bind. Her car registration expired, and there's this late fee, and if we don't take care of it by tomorrow—" "No," I said, the word coming out smaller than I intended, but clear enough. There was a silence on the other end of the line, the kind of stunned quiet that follows an unexpected earthquake. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Michael. I can't keep doing this. I've been helping you financially for over a year now, and my savings are almost gone. I can't afford to keep bailing you out of every crisis. But Ma, this is different. This is important. If Jennifer can't drive, she might lose her job, and then we'll really be in trouble." "Then you'll figure it out," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when my hands were shaking. "You're both adults. You'll find a way to handle it that doesn't involve taking money from your elderly mother." "Elderly mother?" He was getting angry now. I could hear it in the way his words got sharper. You keep saying that like you're helpless or something. You're not that old, Ma. And it's not like I'm asking for thousands of dollars. It's just a few hundred for the registration and fees. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, and pretty soon it adds up to thousands. I replied. I'm done, Michael. Find another solution. I hung up before he could argue further, before he could wear down my resolve with guilt and manipulation. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to set the phone down carefully, like it was made of glass instead of plastic. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before in my adult life. I acted purely in my own interest. I walked 6 blocks to the subway station, rode the train into Manhattan, and found my way to a legal clinic I had seen advertised on a community bulletin board at the grocery store. The building was nothing fancy, just a few offices above a bodega, but the young lawyer who met with me treated me with more respect than my own family had shown me in months. I want to protect my finances, I told her, clutching my worn wallet and feeling foolish for needing help with something that should have been simple. I need to know what my options are if my family won't stop asking for money I don't have. Her name was Christina, and she had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She explained things in terms I could understand, about power of attorney documents and setting up safeguards for my bank accounts. She talked about establishing boundaries and the legal ways to protect myself from financial abuse, even when that abuse came from people I loved. The hardest part, Christina told me as she prepared the paperwork, is usually emotional, not legal. It's difficult to say no to family members, especially when they make you feel guilty or selfish for protecting yourself. My son thinks I'm being dramatic, I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I realized how ridiculous they sounded. He says I should be grateful that he includes me in his life. Christina gave me a look that was both compassionate and firm. Mrs. Rodriguez, inclusion shouldn't come with a price tag. Love shouldn't bankrupt you, literally or emotionally. That evening, I returned to my apartment feeling different than I had in months. The same furniture was there, the same faded wallpaper and creaking floors, but something fundamental had shifted. I had taken concrete steps to protect myself, to draw lines that I was prepared to defend. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking up worried about money or wondering when the next crisis call would come. The sheets smelled like lavender from the fabric softener I had splurged on at the grocery store, a small luxury I had denied myself for too long while sending money to Michael and Sarah for their endless emergencies. I breathed in that gentle scent and felt like I was breathing freedom itself, the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. The city noises outside my window, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, the late-night conversations of people walking home from dinner, seemed less oppressive somehow. Instead of reminders of urban loneliness, they sounded like the heartbeat of a living city, a place where millions of people were figuring out how to make their lives work, without depending on their elderly parents to subsidize their mistakes. A month passed before the inevitable confrontation, and I used that time to strengthen my resolve and prepare for what I knew was coming. Michael had tried calling several more times, each conversation ending the same way, with him asking for money and me saying no, with him getting frustrated and me staying calm. Sarah had started taking his side more openly, calling to lecture me about family loyalty and suggesting that I was being unfair to expect my children to solve all their problems without my help. That's exactly what I want, I told her during one of these calls. I want you and Michael to solve your problems without my help. That's what adults do. But we're family, she protested. Family helps each other. Family doesn't exploit each other, I replied. And help goes both ways. When's the last time either of you asked how I was doing? Really doing? Not just whether I was available to write another check? She couldn't answer that question, and I let the silence stretch between us until she mumbled something about being busy and hung up. When Michael finally demanded a face-to-face meeting, I was ready. He showed up on a Tuesday evening in late January, and I could see the calculation in his eyes as he assessed my mood and my resolve. He had brought Sarah with him, and Robert emerged from the bedroom where he had been hiding since this whole conflict began. I had prepared the living room like a stage set for the most important performance of my life. The family photos were back out, arranged on the coffee table between us like evidence in a trial. There was the picture from his college graduation, where he was hugging me and thanking me for all the sacrifices I had made to pay his tuition. There was Sarah's wedding photo, where she was holding my hand and telling everyone who would listen how grateful she was for everything I had done to help make her special day perfect. And there was the most painful one of all, a snapshot from last Christmas, where we were all sitting around my tiny dining table, looking like the perfect happy family while underneath the surface, the resentment and exploitation had already begun to calcify into something poisonous. We need to talk about this money thing, Michael said without preamble, settling onto my couch like he owned it. You're being unreasonable, Ma. Sarah and I have been talking, and we think you're going through some kind of phase. A phase? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger rising in my chest. Is that what you call it when a person decides to stop being taken advantage of? Nobody's taking advantage of you, Sarah said, but her tone was defensive, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. We're your children. We're supposed to be able to count on you when we need help. And I'm supposed to be able to count on you to respect me when I say I can't help anymore, I replied. But apparently that's not how this family works. Robert cleared his throat, the sound he always made when he was about to say something he thought would solve everything. Now, honey, maybe we can find some kind of compromise here. The kids are struggling and we have a little money set aside. No, I said, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. Robert, we don't have money set aside. We had money set aside before I spent it all on their emergencies, and I'm not compromising anymore. That's when I did something that shocked all of them, including myself. I reached for the framed family photo from last Christmas, the one where we all looked so happy and united, and with steady hands, I tore it in half. The sound the paper made as it separated was louder than I expected, like a small thunderclap in the quiet room. Their faces froze in expressions of shock and disbelief. Sarah actually gasped, like I had committed some unforgivable sacrilege. Michael's mouth fell open, and Robert looked at me as if I had lost my mind entirely. I will no longer buy love, I said, my voice clear and calm as I set the torn pieces of the photograph on the coffee table between us. I will no longer pay for the privilege of being treated like an ATM instead of a human being. Respect me or lose me. I opened the small safe where I kept my important documents and my emergency cash, the safe that only I knew the combination to, and I locked it with deliberate ceremony. The metallic click of the lock engaging seemed to echo in the silent room. From now on, I continued, my finances are my business. My home is my sanctuary, not a free restaurant or a crash pad for your friends. And my time and energy are gifts that I choose to give, not obligations that you can demand. Michael's face had gone through several color changes during my speech, settling finally on a deep red that suggested he was either furious or embarrassed or both. Ma, you can't be serious. We're your family. We need you. You need my money, I corrected. There's a difference. Sarah tried a different approach, the one she had used successfully since childhood when she wanted something from me. Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice got soft and pleading. Mom, please don't do this. I know we haven't been perfect children, but we love you. Doesn't that count for anything? Of course it counts, I said, and for a moment my resolve wavered because she looked so much like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But love without respect isn't enough anymore. And love that only shows up when you need something isn't love at all. It's manipulation. Robert made one last attempt to restore the status quo that had worked so well for everyone except me. Honey, think about what you're doing. These are our children. If you cut them off like this, you might lose them forever. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had spent decades choosing the path of least resistance, who had decided long ago that it was easier to let me be the difficult one, the one who said no and enforced boundaries and dealt with the uncomfortable emotions. He wanted me to go back to being the bottomless well of support and resources, so he wouldn't have to deal with our adult children's disappointment and anger. Robert, I said gently, I lost them a long time ago. What I'm doing now is trying to find myself. The meeting ended without resolution, which was a resolution in itself. Michael stormed out, muttering about ungrateful parents and empty threats. Sarah lingered, trying one more time to guilt me into changing my mind, but when she realized I wasn't going to budge, she left too. Robert retreated to the bedroom and the safe familiarity of his television shows, leaving me alone in my living room with the torn photograph and a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. I stood by my window that night, looking out over the city lights and feeling like I was seeing them clearly for the first time in decades. The streetlights looked like stars, each one representing someone else who was fighting their own battles, making their own difficult choices, learning their own hard lessons about love and respect and the price of both. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. 3 weeks after our family confrontation, when I had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could build a new life based on mutual respect instead of financial obligation, the final test of my transformation arrived in the most humiliating way possible. I was at the Bronx Community Center on a Thursday afternoon, attending a senior citizens lunch that Elena had convinced me to try. It was nothing fancy, just folding tables set up in a gymnasium with volunteers serving simple meals to about 50 older adults from the neighborhood. But it felt good to be somewhere I belonged, somewhere my age was an asset instead of an inconvenience, somewhere people were interested in talking to me about things other than money. I was sitting with Elena and two other women from our building, Rosa and Carmen, sharing stories about our grandchildren and complaining good-naturedly about the cold weather, when I noticed a commotion at the far end of the room. Someone was talking loudly, gesticulating with animated hands, and getting laughs from a group of younger people who had come to volunteer. As the voice got clearer, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was Michael, holding court with a group of college students who were serving meals as part of some community service project, and the story he was telling was about me. "So my mom thinks she's being all tough and independent now," he was saying, his voice carrying easily across the room. "She cut me and my sister off financially because we supposedly took advantage of her generosity. But the truth is, she's just being dramatic. She's got plenty of money. She's just being stingy because she wants to control us." The college students were laughing and shaking their heads in that way young people do when they hear about older adults behaving badly. One of them, a girl with purple hair and multiple ear piercings, said something I couldn't quite hear, and Michael laughed even louder. "Right? I mean, what's money for if not to help your kids when they need it? It's not like she's going to take it with her when she dies, you know?" More laughter, more head shaking, more casual dismissal of my feelings and my right to make decisions about my own life. Elena noticed me getting tense and followed my gaze across the room. Her face tightened when she realized what was happening. "Is that your son?" she whispered. I could only nod, my throat too constricted to speak. The humiliation was overwhelming, but it was mixed with something else. A cold, clear anger that settled into my bones like armor. "He's getting paid to volunteer here," Elena said quietly, and I realized she was right. The college students were part of some work-study program, earning money while fulfilling community service requirements. Michael was being paid to serve meals to senior citizens while simultaneously mocking one of those senior citizens to his coworkers. But the worst part came next, when one of the students asked him how he controlled me before I got stubborn. Michael's answer made me feel like I was watching my own character assassination in real time. "Oh, it was easy," he said, still grinning like this was all a big joke. "I just had to make her feel needed, you know. Like, I'd call her up with some emergency, act all stressed out and helpless, and she'd just throw money at the problem to make it go away. She loved feeling like the hero, like she was saving the day. It was actually kind of pathetic how eager she was to help." The girl with purple hair frowned. "That sounds kind of manipulative," Michael shrugged. "I prefer to think of it as strategic parenting management. She's retired, she's got nothing else to spend her money on, and it made her feel useful. Win-win, right?" That's when I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, and my hands were shaking with rage, but I stood up anyway because sitting there and listening to any more of this would have destroyed what was left of my self-respect. Elena tried to catch my arm, probably worried that I was going to make a scene, but I gently pulled away from her. I walked across that gymnasium with my head held high, past the other senior citizens who were watching curiously, past the volunteers who were starting to realize that something was happening, straight to where my son was standing with his new friends. "Michael," I said, and my voice was steady and clear despite the storm raging inside me. He turned around, and the color drained from his face when he saw me standing there. The college students looked back and forth between us, suddenly uncomfortable as they realized they had been laughing at someone's mother right in front of her. "Ma," he said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to hide behind my skirt when he was in trouble. "I didn't know you were here." "Obviously," I replied. "Otherwise you might have chosen a different topic of conversation." The silence that followed was excruciating. The purple-haired girl looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The other volunteers had stopped what they were doing and were watching our interaction with the kind of fascinated horror people reserve for car accidents and family meltdowns. "I just want you to know," I said, speaking directly to Michael but loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that everything you just said about me is true. I did make it easy for you to take advantage of me. I did throw money at your problems instead of requiring you to solve them yourself. And yes, I probably did seem pathetic in my eagerness to help." Michael opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "But here's what you got wrong," I continued. "It wasn't strategy on your part. It was love on mine. And it wasn't win-win, because I was losing myself a little more every time I said yes when I should have said no. The only pathetic thing here is that it took me 71 years to realize that buying someone's attention is not the same as earning their love." I turned to address the college students who were staring at me with wide eyes. "And just so you know, there's nothing funny about financial elder abuse, even when the elderly person is complicit in it. Someday, if you're lucky, you'll be old too. I hope when that day comes, the people you love will treat you with more respect than my son has shown me." Then I walked away, leaving Michael to explain himself to his coworkers and leaving the entire room in stunned silence. My hands were still shaking, but it was a different kind of trembling now. Not fear or shame, but the aftershock of finally standing up for myself in a way that mattered. Elena caught up with me in the parking lot, slightly out of breath from hurrying to keep pace with my surprisingly quick exit. "Maria," she said. "That was magnificent. That was horrible," I replied. But even as I said it, I realized I didn't entirely mean it. It had been horrible and magnificent at the same time, like so many of life's most important moments. "He's probably going to be angry," Elena said as we walked toward the bus stop. "He's been angry at me for weeks," I pointed out. "The only difference now is that I don't care." And that was the truth, I realized. I genuinely didn't care if Michael was angry or embarrassed or frustrated by my behavior. His feelings about my choices were no longer my responsibility to manage. The relief of that realization was so profound that I almost laughed out loud right there on the street corner. That evening, I received 15 text messages from Michael, ranging from furious to pleading to manipulative to threatening. I read them all, and then I blocked his number. Sarah called an hour later, crying and begging me to reconsider, to think about how this was affecting the whole family, to consider what people would think. "Sarah," I interrupted her mid-sob, "what people think about my relationship with my adult children is not my concern anymore. What you and Michael do with your lives is not my concern anymore. The only person I'm responsible for is myself, and I'm finally learning how to handle that responsibility." She hung up on me, but not before telling me that I was being cruel and selfish and that I would regret this decision when I was really old and had nobody left to take care of me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would end up alone in some nursing home, forgotten by my family, dependent on strangers for care and companionship. But at least I would be there with my dignity intact, knowing that I had stood up for myself when it mattered, that I had chosen self-respect over the illusion of being needed. The next morning, spring arrived in New York City like a surprise gift I hadn't expected to receive. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows, and for the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel: excitement about the day ahead. I decided to take a painting class. The idea came to me while I was having my morning coffee, sitting at my kitchen table and looking at the blank wall where I used to keep a family photo. Instead of sadness, I felt possibility. Instead of emptiness, I saw potential. The New York Academy of Art offers classes for senior citizens at a reduced rate, and I had been secretly envious of Elena's watercolor landscapes for months. That morning, I called and enrolled in a beginner's painting workshop that met every Saturday morning in Manhattan. "Maria," Elena said when I knocked on her door to share the news. "That's wonderful. I've been wanting to take a class there for years, but I was nervous about going alone. Would you like to go together?" I asked, and the way her face lit up reminded me that there were still people in the world who valued my company, for reasons that had nothing to do with my bank account. We took the subway into Manhattan that first Saturday, two elderly women with art supplies and canvas bags, chattering like schoolgirls about colors and composition and the paintings we hoped to create. The studio smelled like oil paint and turpentine and possibility, and I felt more at home there than I had felt in my own apartment in months. The instructor, a patient man in his 40s named David, showed us how to hold a brush, how to mix colors on a palette, how to see light and shadow in ways we had never noticed before. My first painting was terrible, a lopsided still life of fruit that looked more like abstract blobs than anything recognizable. But it was mine, created by my hands, a product of my own vision and effort. "You have good instincts," David told me after the class, studying my canvas with the serious attention of someone who saw potential where I saw only mistakes. "With practice, you could really develop something special here." Nobody had told me I had potential for anything in years. The compliment settled into my heart like warm honey, sweet and nourishing and completely unexpected. I redecorated my apartment that spring, not with expensive furniture or professional help, but with small changes that reflected the person I was becoming instead of the person I had been. I bought fresh flowers every week from the bodega on the corner, bright daffodils and cheerful tulips that filled my living room with color and life. I replaced the faded curtains with ones in soft yellow, a color that made the whole space feel larger and more welcoming. The wall where the family photos used to hang became a gallery for my paintings. They weren't masterpieces, but they were proof of something important, that I was still growing, still learning, still capable of creating beauty in the world. Elena often stopped by to see my latest work, and she always found something encouraging to say about my progress. One warm evening in May, we sat by my kitchen window with glasses of wine, actual wine, not the cheap cooking sherry I used to buy, watching the street life unfold 3 stories below us. Young couples walked hand in hand toward the subway. Children played hopscotch on the sidewalk while their parents watched from stoops and fire escapes. The city hummed with the energy of people living their lives, pursue their dreams, making their own choices about what mattered. Do you miss them? Elena asked gently, and I knew she was talking about my family. I miss the idea of them, I said after thinking about it for a while. I miss the hope I used to have that things could be different, that love could be enough to overcome everything else. But I don't miss the actual relationship we had, because it wasn't really a relationship at all. It was a business arrangement disguised as love. Do you think they'll ever change? She asked. Maybe, I said, watching a young mother push a stroller down the sidewalk while talking animatedly on her phone. People can change if they want to badly enough, but they have to want it for themselves, not because someone else is demanding it. And I can't wait around hoping they'll figure it out. Elena nodded, understanding radiating from her dark eyes. She had raised her own children, buried her own husband, navigated her own disappointments and discoveries. She knew that loving someone sometimes means accepting that you can't save them from themselves. That night, I slept peacefully under sheets that smelled like lavender, in a bedroom decorated with my own paintings, in an apartment that belonged entirely to me. The city sounds outside my window, sirens and car horns and late-night conversations, sounded like a lullaby, the heartbeat of a place where millions of people were figuring out how to be themselves in a world that constantly tried to tell them who they should be. 6 months after I had torn that family photo in half, I was a different person living a different life. Not dramatically different, not unrecognizably transformed, but fundamentally changed in ways that mattered. I woke up each morning with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or crises. I went to painting classes and senior center lunches and neighborhood association meetings because I wanted to, not because I was trying to fill the hollow spaces left by dysfunctional relationships. I had become friends with other women in my building, women like Carmen, who had divorced her gambling-addicted husband at age 68 and was now learning to dance salsa, and Rosa, who had started a small business selling homemade tamales after her grown children told her she was too old to work. We were all reinventing ourselves in our 70s, all discovering that it was never too late to choose dignity over desperation. The financial pressure that had consumed so much of my mental energy was gone. Without the constant drain of Michael's emergencies and requests, my modest income was actually sufficient for my modest needs. I could afford small luxuries again: good coffee, fresh flowers, art supplies, occasionally a movie or a dinner out. More importantly, I could afford to be generous on my own terms, contributing to causes I believed in instead of funding the irresponsibility of people who took my generosity for granted. I had sent a donation to the community center where Michael had humiliated me, specifically earmarked for their senior meal program. It felt good to give money to something worthwhile, something that would genuinely help people instead of enabling destructive patterns. The thank you note I received from the program director was more meaningful than any gratitude I had ever received from my own family. One October evening, as I was walking home from a painting class where I had actually completed a landscape I was proud of, I saw Sarah sitting on the front steps of my building. She was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before, and her hair was shorter than she usually wore it, and she looked older somehow, more serious. My first instinct was to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen her and avoid the confrontation that was clearly waiting for me. But something in her posture, the way she was sitting with her elbows on her knees, staring at her hands instead of watching for me, made me stop. "Sarah?" I said finally, and she looked up with eyes that were red-rimmed but not actively crying. "Hi, Mom," she said. And her voice sounded different too, less demanding and more uncertain. "What are you doing here? I wanted to talk to you. I've been thinking about everything that happened, about the things I said to you and the things I didn't say." She stood up slowly, like someone who was unsure of her welcome. "Could we maybe go somewhere and talk? I'll buy the coffee." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but what I saw instead was something I hadn't seen from her in years: genuine remorse. It wasn't the performative guilt she had used to get her way when she was younger, but real regret for real harm caused. "There's a diner around the corner," I said finally. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something before we go anywhere. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I'm not going to go back to the way things were just because you've decided you want to have a relationship with me again." "I know," she said quickly. "I mean, I hope not. The way things were wasn't good for you. It wasn't good for any of us, really, but especially not for you." We walked to the diner in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts about how this conversation might go. The place was nearly empty, just a few other customers scattered among red vinyl booths, the kind of neighborhood restaurant that had probably looked exactly the same for 30 years. Sarah ordered coffee and pie. I ordered tea and nothing else. Old habits die hard, and I was still inclined to be careful with my money, even for small indulgences. "Mom," she began, then stopped and started again. I've been in therapy. I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, waiting to see where this was going. The therapist asked me to think about my relationship with you from your perspective, to imagine what it felt like to be constantly asked for help and never asked how I was doing. Sarah stirred sugar into her coffee with unnecessary concentration. It was eye-opening. How so? I realized that I hadn't asked about your health, your interests, your feelings, your life in general for years, maybe decades. Every phone call was about something I needed, some problem I wanted you to solve, some crisis I expected you to fix with your time or money or both. She was right, of course, but hearing her acknowledge it was somehow both validating and painful. And I realized that I didn't actually know you anymore. I knew you as my mother, as someone who was supposed to be available for me whenever I needed something, but I didn't know you as a person. I didn't know what you liked to do for fun, what your dreams were, what made you happy or sad or excited. Tears were starting to form in her eyes again, but she didn't let them fall. I didn't even know you were taking painting classes until Mrs. Ortiz mentioned it to Carmen, and Carmen told Rosa, and Rosa told me. The neighborhood gossip network was alive and well, apparently. I made a mental note to be more careful about what I shared with Elena if I didn't want it broadcast to the entire building. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I want to know you, Sarah said simply. I want to have a real relationship with you, not just a transactional one. I want to ask how you're doing and actually listen to the answer. I want to hear about your paintings and your friends and whatever else is going on in your life. And if I'm not interested in lending you money anymore, then you don't lend me money anymore, she said, and her voice was steady. Mom, I got a second job. I figured out how to handle my expenses without constantly running to you for help. It wasn't easy, and it meant making some sacrifices I didn't want to make, but it was good for me. I should have done it years ago. I sipped my tea and studied my daughter's face, trying to decide if this change was real or if it was just another, more sophisticated form of manipulation. She seemed sincere, but she had seemed sincere before too. What about Michael? I asked. Sarah's expression darkened. Michael is still Michael. He's angry at you, angry at me for coming here, angry at the world in general for not giving him what he thinks he deserves. He's not ready to take responsibility for his own choices yet. And you are? I'm trying to be, she said. I know I hurt you, Mom. I know I took advantage of your love and your generosity, and I know it might be too late to fix that. But I want to try, if you're willing to let me. I thought about Elena's roses, how she had explained to me that some plants need to be cut back severely before they can grow again properly. Sometimes what looks like destruction is actually preparation for new growth. I'm willing to try, I said finally, but things are going to be different. I hope so, Sarah said, and for the first time since she had started talking, she smiled. Different sounds good. We spent the next 2 hours talking about things we had never discussed before. She told me about her job, her marriage, her fears about raising teenagers in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. I told her about my painting classes, my new friendships, my plans to take a weekend trip to the Hamptons with Elena in the spring. The Hamptons? She said, looking surprised. Mom, that's expensive. I can afford it, I replied calmly. When you stop spending your money on other people's emergencies, it's amazing how much you have left over for your own dreams. She laughed. Actually laughed, and it was a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. You sound different. Happier. I am happier, I said, and realized it was true. It took me a long time to figure out that I was allowed to be happy, that making other people happy at the expense of my own well-being wasn't noble. It was self-destructive. When we left the diner that evening, Sarah hugged me goodbye, and it felt different from the obligatory embraces we had shared at family gatherings for years. This hug felt genuine, like it came from a person who actually cared about me, rather than someone who was going through the motions of filial affection. Can I call you sometime? She asked. Not because I need anything, just to talk. I'd like that, I said, and I realized as I watched her walk toward the subway station that I actually would like it. Not the old version of Sarah who saw me as a resource to be managed, but this new version who seemed interested in seeing me as a human being with my own hopes and fears and dreams. Michael never came around. Over the following months, I heard updates about him through the neighborhood network. He had moved in with a girlfriend who apparently had more money than sense. He had been fired from his job at the community center for inappropriate behavior. He had started an online business that was probably some kind of scam. I felt sad for him, the way you feel sad for someone who is determined to make destructive choices, but I didn't feel responsible for fixing his life anymore. The most important thing I learned during that transformative year was that love doesn't require sacrifice of the self. Real love, healthy love, enhances both people in the relationship. It builds up instead of tearing down. It gives without keeping score, but it also receives gracefully. It respects boundaries even when those boundaries are inconvenient. Winter came and went, and spring returned with its promise of renewal and growth. I had been painting for almost a year by then, and David suggested that I was ready to display my work in the student show at the academy. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. To have my art judged by strangers, to put my creative efforts on display for the world to see. Elena helped me select 3 paintings for the show: a cityscape of the Bronx at sunset, a still life of the flowers from my windowsill, and a portrait I had painted from memory of my mother when she was young. They weren't masterpieces, but they were honest expressions of the way I saw the world, and that felt like enough. The opening reception was held on a Thursday evening in May, exactly 1 year after I had first discovered Michael's text messages about the mom's free buffet. I wore a new dress. Not expensive, but new to me, in a shade of green that complemented my gray hair and made me feel elegant instead of invisible. Sarah came to the reception. She had kept her promise about staying in touch, calling every few weeks just to talk, visiting occasionally without asking for anything except my company. She stood in front of my paintings with genuine admiration and told everyone who would listen that her mother was an artist. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said as we walked home together afterward. "Not just for the paintings, but for everything. For standing up for yourself, for building a life that makes you happy, for showing me what it looks like to respect yourself. It wasn't easy," I told her. "There were times when I thought I was making a terrible mistake, when the loneliness felt like it might kill me. But you got through it." I got through it because I finally realized that being alone was better than being used, and being lonely was better than being invisible in my own life. As we reached my building, I looked up at the windows of my 3rd-floor apartment, glowing warmly in the darkness. Elena was probably in her kitchen, tending to her plants and preparing for tomorrow's small adventures. Carmen was probably practicing her salsa steps in her living room. Rosa was probably testing new tamale recipes in preparation for weekend sales. We were all women who had learned, later than we might have wished but not too late to matter, that we were allowed to take up space in the world. We were allowed to have needs and wants and boundaries. We were allowed to say no without justifying ourselves, to say yes without sacrificing ourselves, to build lives based on our own values instead of other people's expectations. Now, as I sit by my kitchen window on this quiet Sunday evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, I can see my suitcase by the door, packed and ready for tomorrow's adventure. Elena and I are taking that trip to the Hamptons we've been planning for months. 3 days of ocean breezes and art galleries and restaurants where nobody will ask us for anything except our order. The financial statements from my bank account are spread on my kitchen table, showing a balance that makes me smile. Not because I've become wealthy, but because every dollar in that account is mine to spend on things that bring me joy instead of things that drain my spirit. I have enough for my needs, enough for small luxuries, enough for gifts that I choose to give rather than demands that I feel obligated to meet. The apartment around me reflects the person I've become rather than the person I used to be. My paintings hang on the walls, bright splashes of color that remind me daily of my capacity for growth and creativity. Fresh flowers. This week it's sunflowers from the farmer's market, brighten every room. Books I've checked out from the library are stacked on every surface, evidence of a mind that's still eager to learn and explore. I think about that night 1 year ago, when Michael brought 30 strangers into my home and turned my carefully prepared dinner into a free-for-all that left me feeling invisible and exploited. I think about the woman I was then, exhausted, taken advantage of, pouring herself out for people who saw her as a resource rather than a human being. That woman is still part of me, but she's no longer the only part. She's been joined by the woman who learned to say no, who discovered that respect begins with self-respect, who figured out that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling disguised as affection. Those painful memories don't hurt the way they used to. Instead of wounds that never heal, they've become wisdom that guides my choices. Instead of evidence of my failures as a mother, they've become proof of my success as a human being who finally learned to value herself. Life has taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or euros or Bitcoin, though financial security certainly helps. True wealth is measured in relationships based on mutual respect, in work that brings satisfaction, in days filled with purpose and evenings filled with peace. True wealth is the freedom to be yourself without apology, to make choices based on your own values rather than other people's expectations. I've learned that family isn't always the people you're related to by blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose to surround yourself with, the ones who see your worth and celebrate your growth. Elena has become more of a sister to me than Sarah ever was during those years when she saw me only as a problem solver. The women in my painting class have become more supportive than my own family was when they were treating me like an ATM with feelings. I've learned that it's never too late for rebirth, never too late to shed the skin of who you used to be and step into the light of who you were always meant to become. At 72, I'm living the most authentic life I've ever lived, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can do for them. The phone rings occasionally, bill collectors looking for Michael, salespeople trying to convince me I need things I don't want, the occasional wrong number. But it also rings with invitations to gallery openings, calls from Sarah just to chat, Elena checking to see if I need anything from the grocery store. The ratio has shifted dramatically in favor of connections that nourish rather than drain. Tomorrow morning, Elena and I will take the train out to Long Island, two elderly women with art supplies and comfortable shoes, and enough money saved up for a proper vacation. We'll walk on beaches and visit museums and eat meals we didn't have to cook for people who will clean up after themselves. We'll talk about books and paintings and the small daily miracles that make life worth living. And when we come home, I'll return to my apartment that smells like lavender and coffee and oil paint, to my routine of morning walks and painting classes and evening conversations with neighbors who have become friends. I'll return to a life built on my own terms, funded by my own choices, enriched by connections based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. I want to leave you with this thought. Respect is not something you can demand from others, but it is something you can give to yourself. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep love out. They're gates designed to let the right kind of love in. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses and start modeling what healthy relationships actually look like. The hardest lesson I learned was that you cannot love someone into treating you well. You cannot sacrifice enough, give enough, or forgive enough to earn respect from people who have decided you don't deserve it. But you can withdraw your resources, protect your energy, and invest in relationships that give back as much as they take. Have you ever lived through something like this? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, taken for granted by the people you love most? Have you ever discovered that the price of peace was your own self-respect? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and you never know who might need to hear that they're not alone in this struggle. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to choose dignity over desperation, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Together we can spread the message that love should lift us up, not tear us down, and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their age or their relationship to the people asking for their help. Remember, you are more than what you can do for others. You are worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions, and you have the right to build a life that brings you joy instead of exhaustion. Sometimes the most radical act is the quiet one, the moment when you look in the mirror and decide that you matter too. That moment changed my life, and it can change yours as well. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the courage to write your own ending, one that honors both your capacity for love and your need to be loved in return.